right. Lovely. Can you guys hear me okay? Yes. Great. So today we're talking about the evolution of the sharing economy. I suppose this is the clicker, huh? So first off, I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about my experiences and how those experiences led me to my work in the sharing economy. So this is my studio apartment in San Francisco. I've had over 50 people or so stay on my couch, which is about 50 feet away from that bed. So you can imagine all of the experiences that I've had in terms of people just being very, very close to me and learning about how their relationships develop through the sharing economy. I've also shared my car with strangers on Twitter. I don't actually work on a beach. People don't actually do that, but it's a fun photo. This eventually led to writing a book titled It's a Shareable Life, which is a practical guide to the sharing economy, chronicling the stories of actual users very early on. So one of the things that we had to do in writing It's a Shareable Life is look at what is the definition of the sharing economy. And what we came up with was that it was an underutilized resource through a peer-to-peer exchange, enabling people to save or make money and supported by digital trust networks. Okay, so we're gonna go through the evolution of the sharing economy through 3 phases, including the phase that we're in right now, which is sort of an interim, I would say, more messy phase. So phase 1, sharing economy 1.0, the mapping of data and networks to information and things. So this is Craigslist in New York City. It's a classified service. And every category almost on Craigslist turned into its own company, its own peer-to-peer exchange network, as you can see here. So this is where strangers united, where peer-to-peer connections happened originally through data, then through file sharing, eventually through information. So people shared, who they are through things like LinkedIn, sharing of books, DVDs, and CDs by mail. Remember those? And then eventually transacting with physical stuff through services like eBay and Etsy. Eventually sharing time and then homes through platforms like Airbnb and Couchsurfing. And then eventually just stepping into random strangers' cars because it's more convenient and gets you there faster. So sharing 2.0 is where I started writing my book. It's a cultural and thematic shift of human connection and this human connection revolution. And to me, it's the seeds of this cyber socialism. It's a new way to exchange value. This is me hanging out in Paris. I was actually working on a couchsurfing documentary at the time, so these are couch surfers. So this is a serendipity engine and relationship building phase of the sharing economy. And what are some examples of that? Things like couchsurfing, where you can stay with anyone in the world for free on their couch or in their spare bedroom. Things like free cycle, where you can exchange goods. Time banking, where 1 hour of my time and 1 hour of your time, regardless of what we're doing, is exactly the same value. This was grassroots, local and community-driven and network-based. So sharing 2.5 is where I believe we're at now. And it's not great. It's where I almost abandoned all of the work that I've been doing in the sharing economy. And there's a talk I did, actually, where I throw my book down on the stage because I'm just like, this is not what I signed up for originally. It's more about efficiency than sharing, moving humans out of the equation more and more. And the utilization of citizen assets and time in exchange for business value. We'll talk more about that. So it's also the morphing of this quote unquote sharing economy into the gig economy, leading into the automated economy. So what does that look like? Centralized platform dominance, mass global expansion, lots and lots of capital coming from all different sources. In fact, as I speak, Uber is probably doing their IPO. And then luxury as a service, where anyone can have food delivered and their own cook, maid, launderer, and driver show up at their house, right? That was previously, you needed an assistant or a butler. So it's algorithm-based incentives focused on money and efficiency, less on human interaction, and inexpensive labor sold as micro-entrepreneurship. I believe it actually looks like a race to the bottom and moving towards automation. So this is where I asked, is this really sharing at all, or is this just, getting around regulations to do something different? And as Uber investors prepare for this IPO. Drivers are on strike all over the world as we speak. And the original founder of Uber is set to make $9 billion. And there's all of these drivers all over the world who've used their own cars and their own time for these valuations. And Instacart isn't necessarily a sharing economy company, but it is part of the gig economy where people deliver groceries for other people on a peer-to-peer basis, right? They've been accused of actually utilizing tips to pay their deliverers. In Airbnb, when listings increase in a city, rent prices also go up. This is a great book by Sarah Kessler. It's looking at the true human stories of the sharing and gig economy, looking at what's actually happening for individuals. So this is the most exciting part for me, and this is why I've originally kept with my work in the sharing economy, is I believe that we're moving towards sharing economy 3.0, which represents the sharing and remapping of money, value, and incentives, mostly fueled by blockchain and the Internet of Value. So this is a little schematic that I drew on my way to Slovenia a couple years ago. And it's basically showing moving from B2B and B2C to C2C, so consumer to consumer exchanges, right? Like all those Craigslist marketplaces that we saw explode into companies. And then eventually to decentralized network C2C, consumer to consumer, and then pure C2C at some point. So what would that actually look like? Well, we've got taxis, and then we've got Uber. And then there's this Ernst & Young company that actually does shared cars, a shared fleet of electric cars, where all of the insurance and costs are tracked by blockchain technology. So all of this has led me to, I call them 4 different light bulbs, which I believe are all interconnected. Light bulb number 1. The value of data, time, content, and assets at scale is more valuable than the technology that enables their distribution. Let's look at some examples of that. Uber's this massive company, and yet the valuation is going to mostly the founders when it relies on other people's time and their cars. Airbnb relies on the real estate and the time and the space of hosts, and yet is one of the top hotel brands in the world. Facebook, same thing with content. We're constantly creating content and value, and yet we're not being compensated. This is a data calculator kind of looking at the same idea. There's actually a blockchain startup called ProSearch that's actually compensating users for their searches in a private environment. And Facebook itself is actually looking at this too. They're like, we got to get in on this action. So they're actually creating a cryptocurrency behind the scenes and a stable coin. And there's talks about them actually utilizing that not only for merchants, but to pay users for interacting with Facebook. Light bulb number 2, and this is related to number 1. Value creators, hosts, drivers, and content creators should have ownership in the platforms that they help to build. So Kevin Kelly agrees. He says the new methods of equity would unleash tens of thousands of innovative businesses that would not exist otherwise, and we need to include ownership sharing. And Airbnb is like, yeah, guys, we gotta start compensating our hosts. So they've actually been talking to the SEC about how to give super hosts equity in Airbnb. This is their filing in September. Light bulb number 3. If we can tie value and incentives to actions, we can fundamentally program technology with our values. This is a biggie, and I could talk about this for like 15 minutes, but it basically means that things like smart cities could actually compensate people for recycling or hosting community dinners or utilizing public transportation. Light bulb number 4, and I'm a little bit more fungible on this one, but I think it's really interesting to think about. Money is perhaps only needed to match wants and haves, and in a perfect economy may not be needed. This guy agrees. He says, one purpose of money is to distribute goods and labor. In the future, we will be able to solve these tasks differently, without money, instead relying on the help of networks, algorithms, and artificial intelligence. So here are the principles, in my opinion, of sharing 3.0. And where I hope we're going. This is a new economy retreat and innovation center that I'm I'm putting together and stewarding about an hour and a half north of Rome. So if you're interested, come talk to me about that afterwards. And please stay connected. Thank you. Oh, we're doing a Q&A.
Thank you, Chelsea. Thank you for that. Yeah, we've got 15 minutes for Q&A, so if anyone has any questions, stick your hand up, or you can put it on Slido, and I'll come to you. So some of the parts of that Vision 3.0, relate to blockchain technology. And frankly, there's a lot of hype, scams, and bullshit in blockchain at the moment.
Oh my goodness.
So how do you tell the difference between what's credible and what's not?
I think like most things, that comes a lot down to trust, which means looking at the team and the technology. Who are these people? What have they done previously? And really digging into the actual code, and then also looking at, who they are and how much you trust them. Like anything else, any other company.
Because you work with a few blockchain companies at the moment, right? With their storytelling.
Yeah, so we do new economy storytelling for blockchain and emergent technology companies through a company that I co-founded called Block7.
And how do you tell when you're working with a blockchain company there, which ones that you really think have a place in that vision for the future, and which ones are just out to make money in the short term?
So one thing I like to tell people about blockchain is I feel like there aren't very many trains yet. So there's train tracks, which is blockchain, right? And maybe Bitcoin is a train. But I think most companies are actually just building train parts. So how good of a train part is it, and how does it fit into the ecosystem and equation of the future? I mean, I think we're really early. So even if a company doesn't make it long term, that doesn't make it not successful. It just means we're very early days, maybe pre-bust. So.
And one of the slides on your presentation where you've put that graph together, moving towards the C2C model as you see it. I guess the session before this one with Jeffrey Prentice was talking about the rise of the platforms and actually how they're even getting bigger, and more funding is going into them. Ant Financial in the East raised 30% of all VC fundraising last year. It's now in the top 10 financial institutions in the world. Facebook with its stablecoin, which is a much kind of broader, arguably, use case for crypto, and a commercial driver for them. Do you think that really they're starting to move into this space more as a PR exercise, or do you think there's real value moving away from the platform model?
There's like 3 questions in there. So first of all, I think networks and platforms have value in the sense that they have like things like Airbnb, like for example, right? They have the network, and they have insurance associated with the network, and therefore they're deemed valuable, right? So I think that's interesting. So your question, sorry, what was the second part of your question?
Are we going to just see these platforms continue to grow? Do you think we'll really move to that C2C model, or is it more like a B to B to C?
So I think the pressure will come from the inside out and the outside in. I think right now it's very much a press move and a curiosity in seeing what they can do, because they're afraid of newer companies and more innovative companies messing with their model. So they're kind of protecting themselves from both edges. But I think once that comes to a maximum, that will change.
And are there any examples of pure sharing economy models that exist today that you think you've got it already, you're ahead of the curve? Are there any examples you could share?
I mean, I think couchsurfing is one of the most beautiful things I've ever experienced, which is why I did a documentary on it and helped with that. It's really about, I mean, it sounds so simple, but it's just really about exchanging social value with other humans, and something as simple as sitting across from a stranger and making a meal with them or sleeping on their couch is just really, really, really powerful. Originally the founders said it was a platform for world peace. I mean, when you've got people globally doing this, it has the potential for major social impact and change in ways that we can't even see.
How do we make that go more mainstream? How do we get more people involved?
I think we marry something like couchsurfing with all of the tools and the protections and maybe even the autonomy of Airbnb and blockchain, right? So if you could imagine a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization, running with couchsurfing and Airbnb's sort of infrastructure, I don't know how all those things would work together because some of them are in conflict. And mapped the incentives right, I think it would work a lot better. Because right now, Couchsurfing is a legacy platform and it's kind of broken, right? It's been tried to be rebuilt many, many times, and it's just difficult. It doesn't work the same way as more modern platforms.
I think it does get messy when we start looking at the private sector. Yesterday we heard from Yat Sui on the main stage from Outblaze, a gaming company who's looking at non-fungible tokens as the first use case for blockchain that really could go mainstream, because gamers are much more used to experimenting with testing new ideas. Do you see that we'll end up with a fully tokenized economy? Can that idea of tokens within games take us into the mainstream?
Yeah, I have a fear about tokenizing everything. I think we talked about that before this. Like, I think it's really interesting to map incentives to everything, but I think when we're also thinking about social structures and how we want to relate to one another, that has to be considered too. Because if we put a value on that microphone and on your finger and on this water and on, you taking 10 steps versus 20, I don't know all the values that we'd actually create in the sensors that we would attach to that, but it's tricky, and it's tricky to decide as a society what our values with all of these emergent technologies wrapping around one another represent.
When will this happen? When will we get to sharing economy 3.0?
I think we're on the way, which is why I showed so many examples. I mean, I think we're at this like messy sort of dystopic intersection of possibility, right? These two things intersecting with one another. Dystopic and utopic.
Dystopic and utopic. Come and talk to Chelsea about that afterwards. The question that's coming up on Slido now, what kind of sharing tools do you use yourself?
It's a great question. So I feel like the sharing economy at this point for me is a mentality, and everywhere I go, I try to share with people. I'm often on the road, so I don't have like assets or a car with me at any point right now. So I'll try to share rides from the airport, and do as much as I can to interact with other people in a meaningful way.
And is there any advice that you'd give to entrepreneurs in the room that are looking to get more involved in the sharing economy? Where are the gaps in the value chain that need more development?
Yeah, I think anything where you can rethink the model and remap it. I mean, you could take anything from, I think, Airbnb or Couchsurfing to basically any platform that relies on a fee basis, a percentage of sales basis. You could completely and fundamentally change with blockchain because the transaction costs are so much lower, if not non-existent. So there's so much to play with there in terms of incentivizing behavior and people and mapping those things together.
Let's talk a bit more about that incentivization piece. How do you stop that from being kind of a, capitalistic way of incentivizing people to work harder and not get much more in return? How do you make sure there's real value attached to incentivization?
I think that's why I talk so much about shared ownership, because I believe that if we don't all have a piece of these platforms and 5 companies, run the world, basically, that's not good for anybody. So I don't want people to feel like or be, to the mercy of these companies. Like, I want them to actually get compensated for the value that they're creating as they create it. And I think that that's like a very, very powerful idea that's moving up in our consciousness. And I think people will start to demand it from the inside out and the outside in.
Tell us what you mean by the outside in, inside out. Can you give a good example of that?
So I think I gave some examples in the presentation, right? So things like Airbnb talking to the SEC, and then the outside in would be companies like, there's something called the B token, which I don't think is a valiant attempt at this, but is looking at how do we utilize blockchain to compensate hosts for actually hosting people. It's not in the form of ownership yet, though, but I think that's possible.
Tell us a bit more about the B token. So that's the Airbnb project that they're exploring.
No, it's a blockchain startup, actually. They transitioned their model, though, from originally saying, like, we're not going to charge any fees. They're not giving away any ownership but they said that they were doing no fees, and then they decided actually to move up market because that wasn't working right away for them. I mean, it's hard. It's hard to replicate these platforms. They're massive, and they have thousands of employees. So to do that and do that in a meaningful way is going to take some time and a lot of capital.
Questions from the audience. Hands up if you've got questions. Yes, front row. Let me come out.
Hi. My name is Judith, and we're also building a platform, a sharing platform that connects hosts, artists, and audience, so they together experience private living room experiences, like living room concerts. And where we're struggling right now, because we're preparing for the first financing round, is how to evaluate or put a number to the market for people that think just like you. Like being open, we love to share. It's a bigger mindset, right? But how do you have a tip for us how we could explain someone the potential of the market, which is growing? How many people are out there who think like you do?
So for what purpose? To obtain capital or to get new users?
To give someone, or to just make, it's for investors, but to explain like how huge the market, not the market is, but that this is something that is just getting bigger and bigger, and that's a mentality that is changing. But yeah, could you describe it? If I would be like, what's the market for it? And you can say, hey, there's so many million people who think like that, who have this mentality, this mindset, like people who use Couchsurfing, Airbnb, Uber, whatever.
Right. I mean, I think in a way you're answering your own question, right? Like there's like a couple. I forget how many million people like worldwide use Couchsurfing, but it's massive. So that's one example that you could certainly point to. So just so that I'm understanding, it's people's living rooms for doing artistic endeavors.
It's different kind of arts that are, or artists who perform in private spaces. It could be a living room, it could be a rooftop, whatever.
Right.
In private homes. And also the audience is invited. So
I think looking at
join.
like, I mean, I think you still have to map to the traditional capitalistic economy and look at things like, the math of how much space is underutilized, how much possibility is there to connect people, and what could this look like, and what demand is there for musicians and people to listen to music, and how big are those industries, and like how do all of those things fit together, especially when you're talking to investors, because they just care about money.
Yeah, for sure. We always have a number for houses, for artists, but I was interested in, is there a number for people with that mentality?
That's a great question. There's been a couple of sharing studies. Jeremiah O. Wang has done a few. I can dig some up for you afterwards, get my information, and I'll send you some stuff.
Yeah, that would be great. Thanks.
Other questions from the audience? Maybe a question around exactly that problem, actually. So you're working with a number of blockchain companies. Do you see that and sharing economy, of course, do you see that there are similarities in the challenges that they face? And what's the kind of advice that you find yourself giving repeatedly to early stage startups that are either looking for funding or looking for to grow their user base?
With blockchain, it's really interesting because a lot of the time, you're not only figuring out a business model, but often there's the tokenomics model. So really getting clear on what the tokenomics model is and what the value incentives are and how that works, and being able to communicate that in a meaningful way to investors and crypto holders or whoever it is that you're looking to connect with, is what I find myself repeatedly saying is, hey, you guys, you need to figure out the model, like completely, like inside and out. So yeah, that's a big deal with blockchain. And then with sharing economy, I mean, I would say it's pretty mature. So there's so much information out there in terms of, best practices of peer-to-peer marketplaces. It's, build up the supply side if you have a marketplace first. Typically speaking, there's lots of things. I wrote a report on that too. Can share that if anybody's interested.
Great. It sounds like that would be helpful for these guys as well to share afterwards. So come and chat to Chelsea afterwards if you want to hear more about the sharing economy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody.